Good afternoon. Welcome to our Facebook Live program on biosimilar drugs. I'm your host, Rachel Sachs, Senior Director of Education at the Cancer Support Community. The Cancer Support Community works to help people cope with cancer and become more empowered in their treatment. Our team believes that no one can or should face cancer alone, so we offer a range of services to support patients and help them on their recovery journey. Some of those services include patient navigation, financial counseling, genetic counseling, and pediatric support. We offer support online and through our toll-free helpline. You can also access our free in-person services at one of our 175 locations around the globe. I would like to welcome today's guest to the program. Dr. Sandra Cuellar is a clinical associate professor in the Department of Pharmacy Practice at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Pharmacy and a clinical oncology pharmacist at UI Health. Dr. Cuellar received her PharmD degree from the Pharmacy of Illinois at Chicago College of Pharmacy. She then completed a pharmacy practice residency at University of Kentucky Chandler Medical Center. Following her residency, she completed a specialty oncology residency at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. Dr. Cuellar is a director of the Oncology Residency Program, member of the DSMC, and co-chair of the IRB at UI Health. Dr. Cuellar is an editor-at-large for the Journal of Hematology Oncology Pharmacy and an invited lecturer to multiple national organizations. In addition, Dr. Cuellar serves as an ASHP Oncology Residency Surveyor and past chair of the Industry Relation Council for the Hematology Oncology Pharmacy Association. We would also like to thank both Pfizer and Merck for their generous support in sponsoring this program today. Welcome, Dr. Cuellar.
Thank you for that introduction, and it's my pleasure to join you for this important event today.
It's wonderful to have you, and we'll get started.
Absolutely.
Great. Dr. Cuellar is here to talk about an exciting topic, biosimilar drugs. We'll talk about what biosimilar drugs are and how they compare with their biologic originals. We will also talk about how the importance of these drugs goes well beyond their clinical benefits. In the future, it's hoped that biosimilars may help make some of the newest and most innovative cancer treatments more affordable and available for greater numbers of people with cancer. If you're taking or considering a biosimilar, we hope that knowing what these drugs are and how these work will help you feel more confident about your care. I'll be asking our guest questions to start today. Then we'll have time for your questions at the end of our discussion, so make sure you stay tuned for the entire program. Again, thank you, Dr. Cuellar. First question, Dr. Cuellar, biosimilar drugs are copies of biologic drugs. People may have heard about biologic drugs, but let's make sure we all know what they are and what role they play in cancer treatment. Can you explain and set the stage for us here?
Sure, and that's a really good entry question, is really setting the stages. What is a biologic? Because when we talk about biosimilars, we're inevitably talking about biologic drugs. So in general, what I think we are familiar with and what the audience is familiar with are drugs which are in general simple compounds. But when we talk about biologic drugs, the hint is the word, kind of the part of the word that says biology, right? And so when we talk about biologic drugs, the important thing for us to know is that in general, this means that the origin of the drug comes from living organisms. And so the next question is what does that mean, living organisms? Well, these drugs are derived in general from human cells, maybe animal cells, even microorganisms such as bacteria. So the key feature here when we're talking about biologic drugs is that they're derived from living organisms. So when we talk about that, it's important to recognize that when we're dealing with the production, the purification, the manufacturing of biologic drugs, it's extremely complex. And what you're seeing here on the screen is an example of the complexity of the structure of a biologic agent. And you could see here by the different colors, the different shapes that it entails to have a biologic agent. Some examples that we're probably familiar with of biologic drugs, which we've used for decades, are drugs like insulin or even vaccines. These are considered biologic drugs because they're derived from human proteins and human cells. What's so exciting about biologic agents, and in particular, and for us in oncology, is the forefront of many therapeutic management of oncology disease states, is that by using these biologics, some of these agents can modulate the immune system, help our immune system eradicate cancer. They interfere with the ability of the cancer cell to replicate. And so these biologic agents are engineered to interfere with that process of the cancer cells replicating themselves. In general, when we talk about biologic agents in cancer, we can put them into two maybe broad categories. One is immunotherapy biologic agents, which help modulate our immune system to fight off cancer, to recognize cancer and eradicate it. And then targeted therapies. These biological agents are, again, engineered to interfere with the replication process of the cancer cell. So hopefully that answers your question, what a biologic agent is. Again, I think the main point is complexity of the drug, and it's complex because it's derived from a living organism.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us. And I think you actually answered a bit of my second question in terms of how they're made differently. So thank you so much for breaking that down and simplifying that for us. Can you tell us, now that we know the basics, a bit more about biosimilar drugs? How do biosimilar drugs fit into this discussion?
So, and I'm bringing up the slide. So how do biosimilars fit? So when we think about a drug, right? So we have, say, an aspirin, or say, let's just make it a better example, atorvastatin. It was a popular cholesterol lowering agent that, was approved in the United States. And when it was first born, it was a brand name drug and it cost a lot of money, right? You would go to the pharmacy and they're like, here's your Lipitor, your copay is $50. And we're like, oh my God, that's so much money. Is there something cheaper? Is there a generic, right? And so decades ago, the government recognized that these drugs, these simple drugs such as aspirin and these chemical derived drugs, that after their patent expired, that perhaps there's an ability for another company to replicate that drug and produce a generic drug. And by producing a generic drug, it's less expensive than the originator, the brand name drug. And with these chemical drugs, such as Lipitor or atorvastatin, this cholesterol lowering drug, because it's a chemical drug, the pharmaceutical companies can make the drug identical because it's a chemical, right? So you have a carbon, a hydrogen, and a sulfate. I'm just making up these chemicals. I have that, and then I could have this other company come in and make it, and it could be identical. So then you have a generic. The generic company doesn't have to do all the original data and investigations. So inevitably it becomes very inexpensive. And in some cases, even up to 50% cheaper, these generic drugs. But it's a very easy thing to do because it's a simple process. Okay, so now let's switch to biologics. And I'm going to get to your answer about biosimilars, but I think this sets the stage. So what do we say about biologics? These are complicated. And you can see here on the slide, when we compare the aspirin, how simple that is, that molecule, compared to this big biologic complex molecule. You can even see the molecular weight of the difference between a simple chemical drug versus a biologic drug. In this case, this is an example of a monoclonal antibody. So when research is discovered to generate these biologic agents and how to modulate them, the production of them, so just in general, it takes about 15 years from the development of a biologic drug to FDA approval, about 15 years. And it takes estimately $800 to $1 billion. These are some of the estimates that you will find in doing research. Does that sound like a lot of money?
A tad.
It's a lot of money. So there's a time development and as well as $800 million to $1 billion to generate this biologic drug. And that includes the clinical trials to investigate its efficacy and safety and use it, and in particular in oncology. So we've been using biologics, I would say over 20 years, we've been using biologics. And so they have now become the standard of care in a lot of our cancer states, in lymphoma, in breast cancer, in colon cancer, in lung cancer. Our top cancers, we're using biologics. That means it's the standard of care. That means if you get diagnosed with a subset of breast cancer, you should absolutely get this therapy, this biologic therapy, because we know that offers the best outcomes. Outcomes meaning you're going to live longer, or it may even lead to cure. And so this is cutting edge technology with cutting edge results that beat the simple drugs, the chemical chemotherapy drugs. But what has happened, and why we're talking about biosimilars today, is that if you look at the price of these drugs, when they were first approved to 10, 20 years later, there is no generic, right? There isn't that ability to have a drug that's made at a lesser price because it's a biologic. So when we talk about biosimilars, this was the government recognizing that these biologic drugs are increasing in cost, and there's data to support that, and there's no market competition to make the cost lower. So when we think about biologic agents, although some of the quotes are 25% of patients are using biologic drugs, but that 25% represents over 50% of drug expenditures. And that doesn't make sense. A small population of patients are using biologics, but when we talk about expenditures on drugs, they're taking up the most expenditures. And why that is because there's no market competition. There's no one there. Where's our generic for the biosimilar?
There's no accountability.
And there's no accountability, right? And so the drug companies are generating all this revenue. And that's great that they're generating revenue, but they're charging us more and more incrementally for the same drug that was approved 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we're stuck because we still want to offer the cutting edge technology and the best treatment options for our patient. And we're almost handcuffed to pay those prices. And so the government recognized that and said, well, how can we overcome this? So the way they overcome it is by saying, okay, well, we're going to pass some legislation on biosimilars. Okay. And I'm very, us in the healthcare world, we don't want to call biosimilars generic because a generic is a chemical identical drug. And that's just not possible with biologics. It can never be identical because of that it's coming from a living organism. So it's impossible to make an identical drug. So what a biosimilar drug is, it is a drug that is manufactured to be highly similar to the originator, okay? And again, there's rigorous analytics and tests that are being done to make sure that this biosimilar is very similar, to the biologic drug. And, again, in a comparison, it's like what the brand to generic is the same, I would say, is to the biologic to the biosimilar. Okay, that we're not compromising efficacy, we're not compromising safety, is that we're able to make a drug similar to the originator, less of a cost. And so the estimates for a biosimilar drug, just to give you, so I said it takes about 15 years, 800 million to $1 billion. For a biosimilar, it takes about 10 years. And I think it's about, maybe a 200 million. It's still very expensive. It's
a
still
huge difference.
But it's a huge difference.
Sure.
And so what I think that also is important to recognize is it still comes with a big price tag. And so the cost savings aren't going to be as grand as we see with the aspirin and Lipitor example, where you see a slash of a price of 50%. We're really not going to see that yet with the biologics. So we're seeing, and I have another slide to talk about. We're talking about 25 to 30% in some estimates of cost savings. But still, when you think about the price tag, because some of our patients are on these biologic agents for years, they're on these biologic agents. And so I think that that's kind of something that we think about and consider. So hopefully that answered that question and kind of explained things a little bit better on what is
that. You absolutely did. That was great. And it was a great history lesson in terms of where we were, where we've been, and why we've gotten there. So thank you for that. So for our listeners, what more do you feel that we need to know about biosimilar drugs?
What more do we need to know? So I think the biggest thing that I think patients and even healthcare providers, nurses, pharmacists, physicians, is we know the originator. The first drug that we used, we were very comfortable with it. And now we have a biosimilar. So I think the first question that inevitably comes is, does it work the same?
Right.
And so what we can confidently say is that when we look at the biosimilar, so the biggest thing here, and this is where I think not only is it a challenge to understand for non-healthcare professionals, but for healthcare professionals, is that when we look at the FDA approval process of a biosimilar, and it's abbreviated, okay? So one of the things is, how are we know that biologic drugs, whether reference products or biosimilars, they're expensive to make. But how are the biosimilar drugs, how are they able to be less expensive? Right. Well, one of the ways is that they don't have to do all the clinical trials and all the indications as a reference product. That really, when the FDA looks at the biosimilar, they approve it based on the totality of evidence, okay? But I would say one of the foundational, most important aspects of that biosimilar is its analytical and functional comparison to the reference product. And so, and that is quite robust, because you have to, and that's what this slide is illustrating here, the biosimilar compared to the originator. That when the biosimilar is developed, it is being developed and made, and they're testing every aspect of that structure of that biologic compared to the reference product. Okay, that's what they're testing. And it has to be to a high, they have levels of similarity that the FDA will, that will approve. And I'm hesitant, and I don't think the FDA likes for us to use this terminology, but almost like fingerprint identical. That's, just to give kind of an idea. Sure. It has to be highly, highly similar from an analytical perspective, molecular weight. So all these analyticals, and everything is being tested, and that their company has to prove how they are analytically similar to the reference product. So they look at that from an analytical perspective, and they look at it from a functional. So in our world, it's called pharmacokinetics. So when we give this drug, does it have the same concentration levels as the reference product? So they're testing it. So not only is it highly similar, but when we give it to patients, we're seeing that it's acting the similar, same concentration. It's being metabolized similar to the reference product. So when we get to the question, is it effective?
Right.
We have all this analytical data. We have this, what we call PK/PD, where we're looking at drug levels and concentrations, and does it bind to the target that we want it to bind? Those are being vetted. But also with the biosimilar, especially in oncology, is it'll have a clinical trial comparing the reference product to the biosimilar. So that will be conducted in a clinical trial fashion. And here is where, usually one study should be enough to really demonstrate that we feel confident that this drug is behaving the way it should behave, that it's acting in the body the way it should be acting. But it really comes down from that foundational analytical perspective, and every other piece of level of data is just reinforcing what we already knew from the analytical. But the FDA doesn't want to take any chances. The FDA is not like, okay, they look highly similar, we should approve it. No. That's just like, we want more data, right?
Yep.
And so once we get to that clinical trial, that's like the icing on the cake. That's just reinforcing what we already knew from an analytical is they're the same drug, essentially. And so to get back to your question is, how do they compare the clinical trials in terms of, are they equally safe and effective? So the clinical trial data, is really kind of proving and reinforcing what we know. Yes, they are as effective because we have equivalence margins that they have to meet. And the clinical trial data, when they investigated in a clinical trial, it's going to tell us, is there any safety signals? Is there anything that's out there that's showing? I will also tell you that post-marketing, this is a big push for biosimilars too. So once they get approved, that we're following post-marketing surveillance of what safety looks like. But even if you have some reservation about this, and I think a lot of people may, I think that we can always look across the pond and look at the Europeans, because the Europeans have the most experience, the most robust experience with biosimilars. They've been using biosimilars since, I want to say, 2006.
Wow, quite a long time.
It's a long time. And biosimilars in oncology and a non-oncology setting. And there's absolutely nothing that has emerged from the Europeans to say, oh, hold on. This is not safe. There's higher toxicity. We're compromising outcomes with biosimilars. In contrast, the Europeans are using more and more biosimilars and approving more and more biosimilars compared to the Americans. So I always tell my patients and other healthcare professionals is, I could explain it to you. I could provide all this evidence, but even if you still have reservations, let's look at historical experience from other data that have been using these. And I always feel like that's that extra warm and fuzzy blanket to really even give me more confidence that I'm not compromising outcomes. I'm not compromising efficacy. I'm not compromising safety, that I know that this drug is designed to work the same from a mechanism of action, that it comes in the same dose. That's something that the FDA demands. And the side effects and the efficacy and I hesitate with efficacy because the efficacy endpoints of these biologic drugs are often different than the originators, because we're not trying to prove safety and efficacy. We're just trying to prove that they are similar to the originator. So, so hopefully that kind of summarizes and gives you kind of an idea of when we're looking at the biosimilar drug compared to the biologic. And again, these common questions: is it more toxic? Does it work the same? I mean, I think that's really, I think as a patient, that's what I would want to know.
Absolutely. Like, and when you talk,
like, oh, is it cheaper? Just because it's cheaper, does that, I don't
Well,
want
and
to
I
keep
think
the drug.
there's a fear with that. When it's cheaper, they're saying, well, then there must be something wrong with it. What's the difference? And do you find that when you sit with your patients and take the time to show them evidence and show them research and explain what the difference is, that their comfort level increases?
Yeah, so this is, where this has come up, and I think this is good for the audience to know, is will we treat these when we're consenting patients to our treatments? Now with the biosimilars, we're consenting them to, let's just say, I'm going to use an example, trastuzumab. And when
Yep.
we're consenting, we're saying trastuzumab or trastuzumab biosimilar. We're not using trade names. And that's the first opportunity where we can talk to the patients about the biosimilars. So as consenting for these agents. The other part where I become more involved with our patients is when the insurance impacts what we're writing for. And this came out, right at the cusp as these biosimilars were being approved. Patients were already started on treatment with the originator. And then we've been getting letters from the insurance saying, hey, we will only approve the originator until October. After October, you're going to have to use the biosimilar. And so that is the point, Rachel, where we had to sit down with our patients and really have this conversation about, this is being directed by your insurance, and they prefer for us to use this biosimilar. Let me tell you about biosimilars. And I think the easiest ways for patients to comprehend is, again, although I don't love it, but this kind of like generic version is like we had brand name and generic. Now we have biologic and biosimilar. And so really that's the key concept with it. I think where it becomes slightly more challenging is those curative patients, right? Or like, oh, I'm a curative intent. You can just imagine the mindset of these patients, especially like I would say my breast cancer patients. I've seen this a little bit more where it does elicit anxiety.
Sure.
And so I open up the conversation and definitely invite my oncologist because they want to hear it from the oncologist, right? I mean, I could have all the degrees and all, published, but at the end of the day, the patients want to hear from their oncologist. And I think that that's really important that, even in the healthcare setting, that we're all using uniform language, a uniform approach. So we're sending this message of confidence of, this is what my pharmacist said a biosimilar was and the rationale behind it. And my nurses and my physicians are also reiterating what I'm explaining. In addition, I think it's important to really refer them to other online resources. The FDA has really good resources that I like to share, sometimes videos on YouTube. So it's another layer of opportunities for the patients to be informed.
I think you hit the mark, Dr. Cuellar, because I think that patients are anxious when they hear that it has to do with their insurance. They get upset, they get angry. They don't want to be treated, any differently. But really what we have to empower our healthcare workers to do, which is so difficult in this day and age, is to take the time to sit with our patients, whether it be the navigator, the nurse, our pharmacists, and our oncologists who, as you know, are going from one room to the next room and are trying to see as many patients as possible, but to really take the time and sit down with our patients to explain, what they're getting, what effect it's going to have, and what the long run is going to be for them. And that they're going to be in the same similar boat. But at times, sometimes is kind of the key component.
Yeah, no, I agree. Time is a luxury that none of us have enough of, right? We're going from patient to patient, and then we have those unanticipated problems that, like we've had patients like, they were supposed to get in chemo, but now they're neutropenic and they have a fever and we have to get them or send them to the ER. I mean, there's always a slew of issues in oncology that require our attention. And, I think that we, and healthcare recognize this and are working towards, well, how can we what can we do to have, better resources for our patients, or how can we broaden the healthcare team? I think there's the value of the nurse practitioner or other mid-levels, like you mentioned, a navigator. In my practice, we have clinical pharmacists that really do some of the heavy lifting for our physicians and our nurse practitioners to kind of, help address and talk to our patients, inform our patients about these drugs, especially anything about drugs related. We feel very confident in being able to discuss, anything that's drug related with our patients. And so I always, I encourage you in the audience to talk to your pharmacist about any questions that come with drugs. I'm a specialized pharmacist. So, I'm board certified. I did additional training just in this area, but you don't have to have all the credentials and the certification to really kind of talk to your pharmacist about these particular questions that I think are so important. And like you said, Rachel, it comes with anxiety. It's like, I don't know. And this is like life or death for me. And I want to live. And are you compromising me by living, by giving me this drug? And we feel very confident, and some of the data I was interviewed for another pharmacy journal. And one of the trends that I'm seeing is that across the country, small and large healthcare systems are adopting biosimilars as their preferred formulary because they see the value. They see the value in using biosimilars. So I think that is something also that adds comfort. ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, as well as the NCCN. These are two prestigious oncology recognized organizations that both endorse the use of biosimilars. So again, it comes from, we can, at my institution, I'm like, yes, let's use biosimilars. That's one institution, but when you start to see organizations and highly recognized NCCN and ASCO saying like, yes, you could use product A or you could use product B. We're not saying that's a lower tier product. We're saying you can use either or, and you should feel confidence in that. And so again, confidence in what we're doing, confidence in what these organizations are doing, confidence in the FDA, and then confidence in what we're seeing across the pond and with the Europeans. And what the Europeans are I feel like they're always ahead of the game.
Yeah.
The Americans, the French and the Italians.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But I do want to stress one thing that you said, because for our audience and our patients out there and their caregivers, I think that sometimes the pharmacist is what I used to be the director of an infusion center, and they are the absolute best, one of the best resources that's out there. But less utilized by our patients. And they know so much about the drugs and the effects and all of that. And they want to do patient care in terms of having one-on-one conversations. So to our audience, please don't hesitate to ask to speak with your pharmacist. I'm sure he or she would love to take the opportunity and explain everything that's going on and explain to you the difference between your drugs and what you can expect. And they're such a critical part of the team. I know that was the case in my infusion center.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are trained to talk to patients about drugs. That's right. What we do. So please, talk to us, ask us questions. We have been known as one of the most trusted healthcare professionals. That's not something I'm making up, but across time, I've seen that data is like the pharmacist is one of the most trusted healthcare professionals. So, trust in us and trust in the information that, we are providing you to help you feel better and acknowledge and recognize what treatments you're receiving and what is the safety, what is the toxicity, what is the efficacy, and how to manage side effects. We'd love to be a part of the team.
That's right. And I think also your pharmacist really can be that link between you and your oncologist. So when you're having questions about the particular medication or what have you. Just know that they're an added resource and they want to be there to help you. So Dr. Claire, can you tell us what types of cancers or supportive care are biosimilars approved for? You did mention breast cancer. Can you talk about some other cancers?
Absolutely. So we have biosimilars in oncology because we have biosimilars. We had our first insulin biosimilar that was just approved, but I'm just going to talk about oncology. So we have biosimilars that are approved in breast cancer, brain, GBM or CNS tumors, central nervous system tumors, colon cancer, lung cancer, lymphomas. We use biosimilars in lymphomas. Let's see, leukemias, chronic lymphocytic leukemias. We use biosimilars there too. So we use it in a broad range of solid tumors as well as hematologic cancers. They're approved. So wherever the reference product, the originator is approved, more than likely the biosimilar would be approved in the same setting. And the ones that I just talked about, those are therapeutic biosimilars that treat the cancer directly. In oncology, we also have biosimilars that are in the supportive care arena, meaning we have oftentimes we administer chemotherapy to our cancer patients that results in lowering their blood cell counts. So for many decades, we used drugs called growth factor stimulating drugs that stimulate the body to produce more cells. And these are cells that were destroyed by the cancer as an innocent bystander, if you will. And so these growth factors are expensive. And so now we have biosimilars that are now approved to increase your white blood cell count. And then we have biosimilars that increase your hemoglobin. So we have biosimilars approved not only in the therapeutic arena treating cancer, but we also have biosimilars approved to in the supportive care arena to increase your hemoglobin, so you're not anemic, and increase your white blood cell count so that we avoid hospitalization in the hospital for what we call febrile neutropenia. And so we have lots of biosimilars approved both in the therapeutic arena as well as in the supportive care arena in oncology.
Great. So we've talked a bit about what biosimilars are, how they're different from the biologic, the efficacy. We talked about the approval process. You did touch a bit about what the benefits are, but can you tell our audience anything more about the benefits of using biosimilars? Because again, like we talked about, I think the first thing that comes to them is, well, this is what my insurance is saying, or this is what my infusion company is saying and cost. But can you shed some light on some of the other benefits of using biosimilars?
So I think that the major thing, and it's illustrated here on this slide, is the dollar signs, right? We go back to money and savings. And that is the biggest, that's why the biosimilars were brought to market, is because these costs of what the insurance companies, or not the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies were charging, not only are they charging the institution who buys it, but there it trickles down to the patient's out-of-pocket costs, right?
Yes.
So inevitably, you have drug expenditures, not only from a societal, from a healthcare of me buying drugs, but it hits you at the out-of-pocket, your premiums, how
That's
much
right.
co-pays. I mean, no one's immune to this. No one's immune to this. And the higher the price tags goes, the more we have to pay. Inevitably, we have to pay more. We're paying more as a society. We're paying Medicare, higher premiums. And so why these were designed is to try to control the cost, try to incorporate market competition. So maybe the brand name is not going to, the originator, maybe they're going to lower their cost a bit, to try to be competitive with this lower. So it creates this market competition. So there's no longer this infinite reign of increasing the price tag of these drugs every year, and we're handcuffed to say like, okay, well, I guess we have to pay it. So I think the biggest benefit is that it's a less costly treatment option. You have better access to care. Mm-hmm. So we have not only, Medicaid's going to pay for it, Medicare, but it improves access to care, because inevitably that's a problem. You don't want to be diagnosed with a cancer and not get the best treatment because you don't have access, and you don't have access because of cost. So I think that is one of the biggest benefits, is that we're increasing access of these very expensive drugs to a broader patient population. It offers more treatment choices. Again, we can look at the cost of therapy and understand that we're not compromising efficacy, we're not compromising safety, but we're getting a better value. And that's what's important. And as we give more better value, that allows for the other expenditures to be put in other places to improve other healthcare aspects, which I think are desperately needed. More patient navigators. Maybe we can fund it. Yeah. I know at our institution, we adopted biosimilars last October, and I feel like we already hired 3 oncologists, but I don't know if that's the reason, but I'm like, oh my God, where did we get all this money to
right.
Right. Staff? Is it the biosimilar savings or what? But we are seeing, I think that is the biggest benefit, is that it really distills down to, we're saving more money and we're broadening more access of these great drugs, cutting edge drugs that are saving lives. And I'm not exaggerating that. I've seen it in breast cancer. I've seen it in lymphomas. This is standard of care. And so the patients should have access to that, and they should not have access to it because it costs too much money.
That's perfect. And I think what's really also important for patients, because I think the first thing that they hear is, dollar sign money, and it's less for the institution, but you raise a really good point that ultimately they're going to reap the benefits of that as well. Because when you're having a chronic illness such as cancer or another type of chronic illness, the co-pays, the cost of the transportation, lack of sometimes not being able to go to work because you're not feeling well, everything adds up. And if you're going to be able to get a drug that is going to have the same safety and have the same effect, then it really benefits you as a patient.
It does. And hopefully, as United States adopts more and utilizes these drugs more, we're going to get more and more data that's going to further improve the confidence of us using these drugs. We're already starting to see, I'm an author on an annual publication, and even last year, I saw a huge increase in utilization of some of our top 3 monoclonal antibodies, minus the immunotherapy monoclonal antibodies. I'm already to see gaining more and more more of the market than the originators. So we're already starting to see it. So now as we're adopting more, we're starting to see the value. We're going to have more and more post-marketing surveillance and more data to really hopefully eradicate this fear or this unknown, or having less confidence of patients and even healthcare professionals may have with these biosimilars.
Okay. So if a patient who's listening, or a caregiver who's listening, if a patient has the option of taking a biosimilar, what do you recommend that he or she or their family member do?
Good question. So usually this is something that they would have to ask relatively early on in their treatment process. Are they getting a biologic agent? Is the institution, because depending on the institution, sometimes from an institution perspective, the patient automatically gets a biosimilar. Mm-hmm. And unless their insurance says, hold on, you can't get that biosimilar, we want you to use the brand name. Or sometimes you run into a issue is the institution has their preferred biosimilar, but there's 5 other biosimilars that are also available. And so then you have to use another biosimilar. So I think that, and when the physician decides your treatment regimen, they're going to consent you to the treatment regimen, which is something that should be done across any, healthcare service. The patient has to consent to getting this therapy. That at that point, they can raise the question about, are you giving me a biosimilar? What about biosimilar? Is this the best? Because no one's going to question the physician on what treatment they should get, right? But the physician is going to decide based on the patient, because the doctor decides the treatment first. They submit the plan, and then we deal with insurance later, right? The doctor's always going to act on behalf of what he or she thinks what's best for that patient. Then that plan goes to the financial counselors, and then they tell us, yes, this is approved. No, this is not approved. This is what you got to do. And then it circles back to the team saying, okay, this got approved. No, they want you to use this instead of this. And so I think that for the audience members, as you're talking to your oncologist, that's the first opportunity to really bring up this idea of biosimilars. And then secondly, talking to that pharmacist that works with that physician. I would definitely talk to them, because they really can help navigate and are probably involved in even designing the plans. We're often the ones that create the plans that doctors are picking for those patients. The social worker is also another valuable, if you're assigned a social worker, but they can help you and assist you with, well, is this an option? Should I get this option? Does that impact my copays if I go this route versus that other route? So I think it's more, and I think this is, sometimes it's just like, I feel like patients are just like, they don't know who to ask, like you said,
right.
like, who do you ask? I think at first, the physician is not going to know the ins and outs of formularies. The physician's going to write this plan, and then it's going to go to insurance financial counselors, and then it's going to get bumped to the doctor, and the doctor's usually going to come to us and say, like, okay, I can't use this. What can I use? But I think that's that's your entry point. And then really talking to the social worker, your pharmacist too, I think is critical, and nursing too. I think nurses are aware of kind of the process, because this is always a process. You get diagnosed with X, or you progress if you're in a non-curative, and you start off with this regimen, and then the cancer continued to grow, and you have now progressive disease. So now we have to switch to another regimen. And then we submit that to the insurance. The doctor creates a plan that gets submitted. They work it out. Is it approved? Yes or no? If it's not approved, why isn't it approved? Is it because it's a biosimilar product or not? But I think that depending on where you're at, I think one of the keys is are you a formulary? Do you have a formulary? Are you using biosimilars? Because sometimes the biosimilars are being used out of the gate and not even the originator. Like I said, that was something we adopted last year, where we use biosimilars out of the gate, cycle 1, day 1, with a lot of our disease states. But I know there are other institutions have or other insurances will say, use the brand name of this, right, and then the biosimilar of this and this, because and this is where it becomes very challenging. It's even challenging for me as a pharmacist, because there are deals that are being worked out between the manufacturers and the insurance companies. Sometimes the insurance companies with the healthcare systems, all these deals are being made, and we're kind of stuck in the middle trying to navigate this rocky of what is it today? Is it this one or that one? And we're like ping pong balls, sometimes. But it's important to, use your voice and ask the questions. I think that so many times we're just stuck with the anxiety of, I have cancer and am I getting treated? That sometimes these financial questions aren't the first things that are on the top of my mind, right? That's not the first thing that you're thinking about. You're thinking about, oh my God, I have cancer. Oh my gosh, I have to, my whole life is changed. But that's what's so important in programs like this, that you guys are sponsoring is to kind of bring these issues up, to put it on people's radar, to talk about it, to ask questions, because it does impact all of us and patients.
Perfect segue. So I want to let people know ways that the cancer support community can help them when it comes to today's topic. Those who want to learn more can visit our website at www.cancersupportcommunity.org/biosimilars. We have more information on biosimilars and a list of approved biosimilar drugs used to treat cancer. We also talked a bit about the cost of these drugs. People struggling with the cost of cancer treatment can call the Cancer Support Helpline at 888-793-9355. Let me repeat that, 888-793-9355. Or visit www.cancersupportcommunity.org/cost for tips on managing and coping with these costs. Now, here are a few questions, Dr. Cuellar, that we got from today's audience. So let me get to those. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what biosimilar drugs are currently being studied? And also, what role do you see biosimilars playing in the future?
So where are biosimilars being studied? Is that the first question? So it's a great question. Mm-hmm. So in general, when biosimilars are being studied, you're kind of jumping to that clinical trial component. So right now we have, when we talk about studied, I guess I can answer this in two questions. Being studied is we really only look at these biosimilars in like that 1 or 2 clinical trials, and then they are FDA approved. And so we have biosimilars for Rituxan, we have biosimilars for trastuzumab, we have a biosimilar for bevacizumab. So those are the 3 biosimilars that are already approved and are extrapolated to other disease states. Other ones that are monoclonal antibodies that are being looked at as biosimilars are cetuximab, and that drug is approved in head and neck cancer as well as in colon cancer. So that's a biosimilar that it's a biologic that we don't have a biosimilar for. So that's being investigated is cetuximab. The ones that are not yet biosimilars are our immunotherapy monoclonal antibodies. I think we have quite a few years before the first one of that is approved, like our pembrolizumab, nivolumab. These are blockbuster drugs right now that are being used across many indications. But we have probably years before we'll get our first biosimilar because those are relatively new. But probably cetuximab, I see coming in the pipeline. Great question.
Okay. And what is your hope for biosimilars for the future? Let's say 5, 10, 15 years from now.
My hope for the future is that we continue to utilize and take advantage of the value, the economic bring, and that we lower drug expenditures. We lower the expenditures that we are spending on biologics, and thereby decreasing drug expenditures, from a national perspective. When we look at the United States and what we spend on drugs, no other country compares to what we spend on drugs. I know there are other countries, Canada, they don't even use, a drug gets approved in the United States, we're going to use it. There are drugs that are approved here, they're not even available in other countries. In Canada, they have to go through all these pharmacoeconomic models to really prove the value they have and, quality adjusted life years and all these metrics that they use before they even use it. And so here in the United States, I think it's great that we approve these drugs and we can use these drugs, but it comes at a price. And then hopefully what these biosimilars represent is that we're going to slowly relieve that burden of expenditures that we're spending on these drugs. and that that money, that the cost savings can go to other type of healthcare programs or improving the value of care that we're providing. You know, this fee for service is long gone. You know, we are going to be reimbursed on how well patients are doing, what value. It's all about value. What I'm putting in, what are we getting out? You know, are patients living longer? Are those good quality adjusted, you know, are they getting readmitted or admitted? You know, that's a no-no. Why are they in the ER? They shouldn't be in the ER. How can we better treat and manage our patients? I think that's really what I want to see and continue to see in 5-10 years, is being fiscally responsible about what we're doing with drug expenditures. We can't just ignore it. We just can't just keep hemorrhaging money without a price, because ultimately we're seeing all these premiums. And you know, my mom's premiums are $300 to $400 a month for Medicare Part D.
That's right. That's right.
Mom's on a fixed income. She's retired. She lives with me, but I can't imagine having that premium and have to pay rent and have to want to go on vacation or buy your grandkids. You know, that we're on a fixed income. So we as a society have to embrace, I think, and be more responsible about what we're doing with expenditures. And obviously we're talking about drugs, because that represents a big expenditure. So I think that the FDA and the government did, you know, recognize this, put this biosimilar program together, recognizing the value of biologics, but also recognizing, hey, the biologics are getting away with, you know, I hate to say get away with murder, because they're not the bad guys, but they are taking advantage to some degree of, I'm the only biologic, so you're going to have to, whatever I charge, you have to pay for it.
Right.
You have no say. You have no say. And so now we have a say. Now we have a voice. So let's do it. Let's embrace these biosimilars. Let's continue to utilize them to help kind of lower the cost. It's not going to happen overnight. But all the research and the analysts say we're going to see the potential cost savings of these over the next 10 years. And so I hope that does come to fruition. I'm starting to see it now, but obviously we need more time to see the real economic benefit of it.
Perfect. And for our audience, loved ones, caregivers, and patients, to find out if biosimilars are the right drugs for you, we always recommend that you start with your doctor and your healthcare team. I want to close by thanking you, Dr. Cuellar. You are amazing, and thank you for your generous support and your time. Wishing you and your family a wonderful holiday, and your mom as well. And we want to thank our generous sponsors, Pfizer and Merck. Wishing everybody on this call a happy, healthy, and safe holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you.